never done a top 5 of X genre video ever on this channel, and part of it is because I am a chronic fence sitter. It's really hard for me to wrangle my thoughts, set them into stone, be like, yes, this is my definitive favorites of X genre. Part of it as well is that I feel like I just haven't read a lot. I feel like when I look at genres and I look at especially fantasy, I just feel like there are more fantasy series that I want to read before I would make a video like this for fantasy. But when it comes to science fiction, even though there are gaping holes in my reading and just really huge authors who I haven't read anything of from this genre, I kind of don't mind making a video like this because science fiction isn't even my second favorite genre. Not even my third, if I'm being honest. I like science fiction once in a while, but it's not my favorite. I think that it really removes a lot of the pressure to get it right for a video like this. Just makes it a lot more fun. Here are my top 5 favorite science fiction novels. Coming in at number 5 is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I read this when I was very, very young, 3rd or 4th grade, and then I remember rereading it when I was in middle school. The beginning of this novel is seared into my brain like it was a dark and stormy night, and Meg is up in her attic bedroom and she's afraid, and then she goes downstairs and her brother is up making hot cocoa. And there is a sort of sadness that suffuses this book. Meg is bullied at school and very misunderstood. The sort of judgment that her family faces. I just love this book, and I feel like it's one of the most beautiful portrayals of sibling love in this book. And it's weird, it's strange, it's, very steeped in science. I remember the explanation of tesseracts and how you can move time and space like fabric and bring it together. It was such a wonderful way of explaining such a complicated topic to such a young audience. And it's really, I think if I went back and read it, I would be even more astounded by how much science is actually in that book and how well L'Engle takes the sort of beauty of science and portrays it in a way where it's understandable to kids and it feels like this fantastical, beautiful adventure, and yet still is very much grounded in scientific principles and physics. I feel like I really did relate to Meg on a certain level where she feels like she's not like other girls, and I think that is a very controversial phrase. The fact of the matter is that often when you are growing up as a young girl, you don't feel like other girls, especially if you're different in some way. If you're Indian in a class of people who are not Indian, you don't fit in for whatever reason. That is a really natural feeling that comes about. Anyways, that was a really long rant. I don't know if any of that made sense, but yeah, I really loved A Wrinkle in Time when I read it as a kid, and I feel like if I went back and reread it as an adult, I would also love it. And I never finished the entire series. Like, I read An Acceptable Time by Madeleine L'Engle, but I know that this book was part of a quartet. Maybe I'll do that next year. That'll be a fun little project. Let me know if you've read the entire series. Number 4, The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is a very haunting, melancholy book where essentially the main character lives on an island where occasionally things disappear. Things like the birds or buttons or needles. I feel like melancholic is the best way to describe it because it's not overtly sad and it's not overtly political either. I feel like a lot of science fiction books do tend to have this very pointed political message, like 1984 or Brave New World. This book, I think definitely you could read it to have that political message and, take these disappearances as censorship. But I think this book is really more about memory than it is about police, if that makes sense. I read this with my server a while back, and it was a really great book to read in terms of discussion because I feel like as you're reading the book, you have so many questions. For example, so when something gets disappeared, does it all just automatically disappear on its own, or is it the kind of thing where you have to get rid of it? How does this mechanism of people forgetting buttons work? I think the book does a really beautiful job of exploring that, and it's a very human book. I think it doesn't get caught up in the concept of itself. It's more about how does this affect our relationships and the people that we love? How does this affect our humanity? Yeah, like I said, you could read it as a political novel, but I think as well, people in my server pointed out that could be read as an allegory for Alzheimer's. I think that's sort of a general theme in a lot of these books you might find, is that I'm usually less interested in like super hard science fiction and more interested in these more conceptual books like The Memory Police. My third favorite science fiction novel is actually a book that I read this year, New York 2140. I've talked about it a lot on the channel at this point. I read it like right before I started making videos again, so it's been featured quite a bit. But it's basically a future where New York has been flooded due to rising sea levels, and it follows this bright and wonderful cast of various different New Yorkers who live in a specific building that is now a co-op. The way that this community operates and the way that people live in this flooded version of New York is so fascinating. Kim Stanley Robinson's portrayals of community always have this sort of kernel of optimism and beauty and like appreciation for what humans can do when they operate in good faith. I feel like the community that is depicted in New York 2140 is the kind of place that I would want to live. If you're curious for more Kim Stanley Robinson thoughts, I did a live stream a couple weeks ago with my friend Paul, who has read all of Kim Stanley Robinson's books, and he's definitely been sort of the evangelist for KSR in my server, and I had such a great time talking to him about Robinson's work, and I highly recommend that you go check out that live stream, as well as Paul's Substack, where he talks about his ranking of all of Kim Stanley Robinson's books. Paul is definitely more well-read in science fiction than I am, so we cover a lot in that conversation. Okay, was that number 3 or number 4? I don't remember. My next book is Pushing Ice by Alastair Reynolds. This is one of the books where I feel like this is actually like pretty classic sci-fi. When you think of sci-fi, you think of space, spaceships, aliens. Pushing Ice is very much like a first contact story. Humanity's pretty advanced. They have these companies where they will go and mine asteroids for various raw materials and then bring them back. It's a really hard job. I think mining will always be a hard job, regardless of how advanced science gets. Pushing ice is what they call it because it's very cold. They're out on an asteroid and essentially they come into contact with an alien spaceship. You know, the novel sort of goes on from there. What I love about this book is not necessarily the first contact alien stuff, which is interesting, but it's really the story of friendship that devolves into a rivalry, very, very dark place as this sort of plot develops, and, you know, they come into contact with aliens and then they essentially become enemies over the course of this book. And it's really fascinating, the psychology of humans in this very difficult situation. And I really loved watching this friendship devolve into something terrible. I've read one other book by Alastair Reynolds called Revenger, and that was like more of a pirate in space situation where they were going around just basically finding treasure in like sort of abandoned planets. It was a really great book. Revenger also shared a lot more DNA with like a typical fantasy book, so I feel like I should really go back and reread it as well. I fear I might have miscounted because I think this is my 5th book, but I actually have one book after this, so this is going to be a top 6 science fiction books instead of top 5. Number 5 on this list is Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler, and specifically Parable of the Talents and not Parable of the Sower, because I think that this book, as a sequel to Parable of the Sower, answers a more interesting question, which is, what do you do after the apocalypse has come and gone? And this is a sort of similar question that KSR is asking in New York 2140, where it's like, okay, the worst has happened. You have lost everything. The world is in a terrible place. What do you do now? And I think that Parable of the Talents is in a lot of ways a much more complex book because it's not just dealing with the apocalypse. There is a very deep political situation that she's dealing with. The structure of this book, which I can't really tell you without giving away a huge spoiler for the ending of Parable of the Sower, but in particular, the way that this book is written and the sort of different perspectives that you get in this book is so fascinating. Lauren Olamina is just one of the best characters I've ever read. I really wish that Butler had gotten the opportunity to write out the entirety of the series. I think she had planned for this to be like a 7 or 8 book series, and she only ever got to write 2, which is such a shame because I feel like at the end of Parable of the Talents, you could see this play out so much more. Like there's so many little branches that she could have followed, and it's a book about politics, about religion, community as well. I feel like plays a huge role in Parable of the Talents. And yeah, I remember I picked up Parable of the Sower at the Denver airport. Like it was a really quick turnaround where I was like, my phone is dying, I don't have my Kindle, I already finished the book that I have with me, so I ran to a bookstore and I was like looking for something to read. I picked up Parable of the Sower and I just read the majority of it on that flight home. Very soon after that, I picked up Parable of the Talents, and it's just such a good book. I love Butler's writing. And again, the thing that I come back to with Butler and KSR is that they are more focused on solutions to the apocalypse and like how to survive after the apocalypse than just showing how terrible things are. You know, it's really focused on, okay, shit sucks, what are we gonna do about it? And finally, my favorite science fiction book, I have to go with Frankenstein. In many ways, it's the book that incepted the genre as we know it today. I know that's somewhat contentious, but I think it's very influential. Written in the kind of way that I love. It's a Bildungsroman, both for Victor and for the creature. There's not much I can say. I mean, it's Frankenstein. You all know it's iconic. I feel like the writing as well in this book was so lovely, and Victor is such a pathetic main character. He's just really hilarious. The way that he is depicted is so funny. I think unintentionally in parts, but like the fact that the first thing he does after creating the creature is just take a nap, and then when he wakes up the creature is gone. It's like, what were you expecting, Victor? The aesthetic of the book where Victor is this like malnourished chemistry student, I related to that a lot. And the setting of his university, no one took Victor seriously as a scientist in the book. He's just such a fascinating character. I love Frankenstein and I really need to reread it. Watched the movie, of course, and I thought that the movie changed so much from the book, and I don't love that. I was going into it expecting like a very faithful adaptation. I think I need to rewatch the movie with the fact that it's not going to be a faithful adaptation in mind, but I still like the movie overall. I think it's definitely still a good movie. It's just not a great adaptation. The other thing about this book is that I can't remember whether or not I read the 1818 version or the 1835 version, but either way, I think I need to reread it. And definitely make sure that I read the 1818 text this time, if I didn't do it the first time. Also, when I read this, I did a video with Daniel Green and Man Carrying Thing, which still exists out there somewhere. So if anyone's curious, you can go watch that for my thoughts when I read this book and it was still fresh in my mind. Please feel free to psychoanalyze my choices and tell me what you think of me after learning this essential information about me. I would love to know. Also, feel free to share your favorite science fiction novels in the comments down below. Based on these books, if you think there are any specific sci-fi books that I would enjoy, let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.